How did Apple actually become the most successful phone company in the world? Was it really just great design, or was there something deeper? It's easy for us to forget how things used to be. When we're so used to Apple being this dominant, untouchable brand, we forget how these stories actually come from. That's because biographies matter so much. They're standing on the shoulders of giants, learning from their decisions and what made them great under pressure. That's why context for investors really matters. So let's look back. It's March 15, 2013. Xi Jinping has formally taken power, and almost immediately you start to see a shift in the economic landscape at the time. Most people didn't take this seriously enough, but Beijing began a full campaign against foreign brands. It wasn't some small PR campaign like McDonald's food hygiene issues. It was the start of China's Consumer Day complaints, basically a platform where angry citizens were encouraged to vent out against these large companies for behaviors that they called disrespecting the customers. And the company that was caught in the middle of this was Apple. So let's focus on Apple's warranties. If you're an American buying an iPhone and the phone breaks, your warranty will cover a replacement iPhone. But if you were the same person buying a phone in China, reports were spreading that people were basically getting refurbished phone parts, basically a second-rate repair. Whether this was real or not didn't matter. Chinese consumers were upset. There were fake iPhone stores all over China. Store staff would be wearing blue t-shirts. The stores would be designed exactly like iPhone stores, but these were not official Apple stores. But it didn't matter. Chinese citizens were angry, and they were angry at Apple. Before this attack, Apple's sales had grown 67% in December 2012. But in the next quarter, Chinese sales declined, and the growth is only 8%. Tim Cook was forced to make a public apology. For Beijing, it was a symbolic win. And this is the thing that most investors missed. This sensational news story distracted from something more important. China's inclusion in the WTO allowed foreign companies to sell into the fastest growing consumer market at the time. But in 2013, Beijing was saying something very different. It wanted a piece of the knowledge. It wanted to move up the value chain and do R&D and technology transfers from leading companies like Apple. Looking back now, I think we can see exactly why they did this. If you've watched any of the Steve Jobs origin movies, you would have heard that he was an intense person. His expectations were brutal. He cared about design over everything else. When Apple released Apple II in 1977, even though it was a success, it was annoying for Steve Jobs. Why? Because it allowed an open system for third-party applications to be installed without Apple's permission. That basically meant that other people could profit off Apple's computers without actually having any skin in the game. They didn't risk anything, but they got to share in all the upside with Apple. This resentment explains so much about Apple today. I remember when I got my first iPhone, it didn't even have a copy and paste function. It's such a basic feature that anyone could have coded in. But Apple wants full control over everything. And when you think about where this comes from, it makes complete sense. On the hardware side, Steve Jobs was an artist. He wanted everything to be done beautifully, the perfect product in his own eyes, without worrying about cost of construction. But at the same time, companies like IBM were moving in the opposite direction. They were building with out-of-the-box components, using Japanese manufacturing methodologies that were designed to limit the amount of failures. It worked for them. Apple couldn't keep up. They were struggling to work in this way. When Steve Jobs came back, he had a clear focus. He stripped off all the products, focusing on only 4. He gave real power to designers like Johnny Ives. Any senior engineer who did not share in this vision was tossed aside. Jobs was relentless in his pursuit for beauty and perfection. But this had a cost. They had to use outside engineers to build the weird-shaped, semi-transparent iMac casings. I don't know if you remember those colorful computers that some people had. They worked with manufacturers from Korea, Mexico, and Wales, but complete chaos. There were factory fires, faulty products, massive delays, even stories of Korean engineers who were afraid of being kidnapped when working in Mexico. Design saved Apple, but this manufacturing was breaking. And the thing that stabilized them all, it wasn't Shenzhen or Shanghai, it was Taiwan. After all of the chaos with LG and Wales, in Mexico, Apple needed someone that they could trust, someone that was willing to take a chance on the company, demanding changes and low volume production. For the first 5 years when jobs came back, Taiwan was essential. This was where products like the iBook were built, and Taiwan was ready. It had more than a decade of working with Japanese investments in manufacturing, and Apple knew that they had to bring their own engineers to Taiwan. They would work side by side with local workers. They demanded quality that didn't exist at the time. People talk about how the Chinese government would force technology transfer from these foreign companies. But in the 1990s, Apple moved their manufacturing to Taiwan because they just had no other choice. They were trying to balance creative freedom with real physical constraints. No one in the world was able to keep up with Apple's demands. Taiwan wasn't just a cheaper and convenient choice, it was the savior. Apple's relentless pursuit for perfection forced Taiwanese supply chains to level up. Robert Brunner, Apple's former head of design, once said Apple was single-handedly responsible for raising the manufacturing quality all across Southeast Asia. But the logic is simple. Apple brought impossible standards that no one else in the world was willing to attempt. Southeast Asia was. This was like them going to the gym, training, struggling, failing and improving, so that one day it could become a place where the world builds things. And of course, that expertise doesn't just stay locked inside Apple. If a technician learns how to build aluminium casing to perfect tolerance, the knowledge doesn't just disappear. Eventually they'll move on. They'll take those skills to places like Dell, HP, to even local Asian brands. Apple would pay for this education while they and everyone else benefited. It's a classic immigrant story, doing the jobs that no one else wants to do. It's nothing new, but it's very important to pay attention if you want to understand how the tides are really turning. In the next episode, we'll talk about why manufacturing eventually moved from places like Taiwan to Shenzhen, and what this tells us about China's deeper strategy. It's not just in iPhones, it's in AI, autonomous robots, and even drone technology. Because China didn't just absorb the manufacturing, it absorbed the learning. As investors, our greatest tool for understanding the future is history. Mark Twain said, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes." If you take away anything from this episode, I hope it's this. Apple's success wasn't the result of great design, but of decades of manufacturing decisions that shaped how power in manufacturing went from the West to the East and eventually to Taiwan. And once you understand that, you see how the China story was not an unexpected risk, and start seeing it as a long-term consequence for choices made in the pursuit of perfection. Anyway, that's how I see it from where I'm standing. Let me know what you see from your side.